quick recap. There we go. Okay, so Torah reading, and we're in prayers, and we're going through the sections. We're almost to the end. We're going through Torah reading, and we spoke about the process of aliyahs, bringing the Torah to the bima, and how exactly to get an aliyah. And then now, more recently, we started speaking about who actually gets called up for an aliyah. So yesterday we discussed how a Kohen gets priority, and after the Kohen we call up a Levi. If there's no Levi, the Kohen gets called up twice, and we explained the sensitivities of that so people don't think that the Kohen might not be legitimate. What we're going to discuss over here is what happens if the Kohen is in the middle of davening. So do we call him up? Do we worry? Should we make him interrupt his prayers, or can he interrupt his prayers, depending on which prayers he's involved in? So we'll run through the dynamics over here. Okay. So if the Kohen is in the middle of reading the Shema, or in the middle of the blessings of the Shema, certainly if it's in the middle of Shemona Esrei, in the middle of the Amidah, even if there's no other Kohen present, he should not be called up to the Torah. And there's no need to wait for him, but this would be an imposition on the congregation. We don't want people to have to wait. You never want to keep Jews waiting, not just because of the repercussions, but there's a concept in Torah that when you're in a minyan, to avoid things that will cause people to have to wait. Rather, a Levi or a Yisrael is called up, and the Gabbai would not say Ein Kan Kohen, which means there is no Kohen present, because there is a Kohen present. Rather, he'll just say Levi or Yisrael bim Kohen in the place of the Kohen. So the obvious question is, up until now, we were very worried that if you don't call up the Kohen, then people are going to think that maybe he's lost his rights as a Kohen. Maybe something went on in the family. So why suddenly over here do we not have that concern? Any suggestions? No? So because since people see he's in the middle of davening, people will understand that the reason you didn't call him up isn't because there's anything wrong with him, but simply because he's in the middle of davening. So the fact that he is in the middle of davening reveals to the public that that is the only reason you're not calling him up, as opposed to if he wasn't in the middle of the davening. That's one reason that's brought by one of the commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch, the Magen Avraham. Another commentary, the Taz explains that when we're talking about actual sin, and speaking in the middle of davening is considered a form of sin, then that takes priority over possible rumors about his yichus, about his lineage, or about his children. So until now, there was no sin involved, but we certainly wouldn't want him to interrupt in the middle of his prayers just to get his record straight. So, but the other answer says that either way, his record would not be undermined, because people will understand the reason you didn't call him up was because he was in the middle of davening. If it happened that the Kohen was called, so you shouldn't call him up. What happens if you did call him up? So if he's in the middle of saying the Shema or the blessings, he may still, at that point, once he was called up, then he should go up and he should make the brachos. Usually when the person gets an aliyah, he should try to read along together with the Baal Korah, with the reader. But since he's in the middle of the Shema or the blessings, he would make the brachos, but he wouldn't read along, he would just listen. If possible, he should finish the subject in which he is in the middle and stop at a place where the subject ends. Meaning, if he's in the middle of, let's say, the Shema, and he's able to finish the paragraph that he's in without causing the community to wait, then rather stop, let's say, between the end of the first paragraph of the Shema and the second paragraph of V'hayim Shemaya, before he goes up to the Torah. However, if he's in the middle of Shemona Esrei, meaning in the middle of the Amidah, remember we said that the only time a person can stop saying the Amidah is if his life is in danger. So even if he was called up, he obviously may not go up. He may not interrupt his Amidah in order to go up. Rather, they would have to call somebody else up instead. And hopefully the fact that it's the middle of the Amidah would reveal that that's why it didn't go up. So I guess that's one thing to from the start call somebody else up. There's another thing to call him up and then to have him refusing to go up. So once a person is called up, even if he's in the middle of davening, you should stop what he's doing and go up, provided he's not in the middle of the Shemona Esrei. If he's in the middle of the Shemona Esrei, even if he gets Shlishi on Yom Kippur, I don't know, the biggest kippur, whatever it may be, where everybody's wishing all year that they could get that respectful aliyah, if it's in the middle of the Shemona Esrei, then it's obviously decided in heaven that on this particular Rosh Hashanah on Yom Kippur, he's not going to get his Shlishi. However, if he's in the middle of the prayer Elokai Natsar, which is that final concluding prayer at the end of the Shemona Esrei, after he's already completed the 19 blessings, it's kind of a closing prayer at the end. So at that point, the Amidah is not as serious, and he would be able to stop at that point and go up and get his aliyah. Okay, if he's in the middle of an earlier stage of davening, because we went through the different sections of davening, so if he's in the middle of an earlier stage called Pesukei Dezimra, verses of song, then if no other kohen is present, they can call him up, or he should be called up because he's present, meaning up until we say Baruch Hu and we started the Shema's blessings, then one shouldn't be speaking, but if he's the only kohen, then he can be called up. But again, he wouldn't read together with the Balkaira, with the reader. If there is another kohen present, he should not initially be called up, and whatever we've said about a kohen would apply to a Levi as well. As I said, these halachas are more relevant to the gabbai, the guy that's deciding who to call up, but they could also relate to you if you are a kohen or a Levi. And soon we'll learn about what happens if you are, like me, just an ordinary special, or can't call myself special, but if you're an ordinary Jew, but every Jew is special, then we'll see what happens then. Okay, another scenario. If a kohen or Levi was called, meaning they called up Yaboid, Ruven HaKoyen, Rishon or Kohen, and it's discovered that he's not there. So then you shouldn't go ahead and call somebody else up by name, because then people might think that there was something wrong with the first guy that you had to call somebody else up. Rather, you should just get somebody else to come up without being called by name. So we would never have imagined that just that announcement, please come up to the bima, which they make in Hebrew, that itself has halachic ramifications. Once you've called somebody up, then you should not call up somebody else, because that might undermine the integrity of the first person. Because somebody in shul might not know that the first guy is not present. They might think he is present, but they've decided to call somebody else up because something was wrong. Something was wrong with the first guy. So therefore, if you called somebody up and he wasn't present, then the next guy would just go up without being called up. So that it basically, to keep it quiet, we don't want to cause any rumors, we don't want to cause any lashon hara, we don't want to cause any negative talk. However, if it is absence, they call his son. This is an interesting one. So they try to call Ruvain HaKoyen, and he wasn't there. They called him. They said, Ruvain, please come up to the bima, Ya'amoid Ruvain HaKoyen. And he wasn't there, but his son was there. So then they would be able to call his son by name, because if his son can get called up, then certainly it means there's nothing wrong with the father. Because if something was wrong with the father, then it would mean that there's a problem with the son as well. But since this is the father's son, so there's no concern of embarrassment to the father because it's his very own son. Okay. Similarly, if the Kohen or the Levi cannot go up to the Torah because he is in the middle of the Shemona Esrei, then another person would be able to be called by name, because again, everybody can see that the former Kohen, there's a reason he's not going up, because he's in the middle of Shemona Esrei. Okay, what about a regular Israelite like me and you? If Yisrael is called up and is not present, then another person can be called up, because we're not worried about people thinking that he's lost his, he's got effective lineage, meaning that he's not a true Kohen, because he isn't a Kohen, because we weren't calling up a Kohen. There's an interesting concept over here. You might say that maybe people will think that the first guy, let's say, wasn't Jewish, or there was something else wrong with him, and that's why they called somebody else up. And this halachically is not considered. People don't suspect somebody that is presumed to be Jewish of not being Jewish. So even if you called up one guy and he was in the middle of the Shemona Esrei, he wasn't present, then you would be able to call up another regular Israelite, and you're not worried about undermining the integrity of the first guy, because nobody would concern that he's not a Jew. And as long as he's a Jew, he deserves an aliyah. Similarly, if a Kohen or Levi were called up for Achrein, so that's another thing. Sometimes, usually, a Kohen can only be called up first, but there's a concept where they add an extra aliyah, and for that added aliyah, a Kohen can be called up, or for Maftir on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and they're not present, then somebody else may be called by name, because even if he wasn't a Kohen, he still would have been able to get that. In other words, we are worried about people thinking that a Kohen, rumors of people saying that a Kohen is not a legitimate Kohen, but we're not worried about people saying that a regular Jew is not deserving of an aliyah.
Yosef, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So are you talking about, when you're calling somebody up, are you talking about calling them by their name?
So that's a good question, because in Great Park, we usually just say Kohen.
Yeah.
So we don't call, specifically calling somebody by name. I'm not sure what the reason for the minhag is not to call people by name. But if it wasn't by name, then the halacha would obviously change, because nobody knows who you're referring to. Only the guy that got the golden plate, he knows that he got it, so he'll go up. But so I don't know why this is the custom. The standard, I mean, I don't know about standard, but what the Shulchan Aruch speaks about is people being called up by name. I'm sure there's reason for the custom at Great Park where they're not called by name, but I don't have more information on that. Okay. Okay, we'll move along. If there's no Kohen in Shul, or if there was, and nobody knew he was a Kohen, so you think that either there is no Kohen, or there is a Kohen, but you don't know there's a Kohen. I once got into real trouble when I was newly married. I was in a learning center, learning program in Manhattan, and we were involved in the shul over there in Manhattan, and one of us used to take care of the aliyahs. And it once happened, such a mistake you only make once, where I thought there was no Kohen in shul, and I called somebody else up, and there was. And the Kohen, he was really, really upset that I could just overlook him like that. He obviously wasn't a regular, but it could happen. So if there's no Kohen in shul, or if there is a Kohen, but nobody knew he was a Kohen, and the Yisrael was called up instead. So the Yisrael goes up to the bimah, and then suddenly somebody says, "Hey, wait a moment, why are you calling up Yankel? There's a Kohen in shul." So even if the Yisrael, the regular Jew, already said, "Baruch Hu es Hashem hamavayrach," as long as he didn't start the next bracha, "Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam," as long as he didn't yet say "Baruch atah Hashem," even if he's already gone up to the bimah and he's already said "Baruch Hu es Hashem hamavayrach," the moment we detect a Kohen, he immediately is rushed up to the bimah, and he would actually get the aliyah instead. So what would happen to the other guy? Imagine, he got called up to the Torah. He was already holding the Torah. He said Baruch Hu es Hashem hamavayrach, and at that moment you read a Kohen walked into shul, or you realize there was a Kohen. So the Kohen gets rushed up to the bimah. What happens to this other guy? So we'll see. We tell him, don't go down, stay here. And at the first opportunity, we'll give you an aliyah as well, so that it doesn't reflect badly on him. Okay. In order to avoid embarrassment, yeah.
Sorry, does that apply to a Levi as well?
No, because so that would apply if there was a Kohen and you thought there wasn't a Levi. Because once a Kohen has been called up, a Levi has to be called up second. So if the Kohen that was called up was about to get a second aliyah, and then you realize there was a Levi, then the Levi would be rushed up. But if there was no Kohen, and you thought there wasn't a Levi, but there was, then that would not apply, because a Levi does not have to receive the first aliyah. A Levi only needs to go after a Kohen, but if there's no Kohen, then you don't have to give it out aliyah to a Levi. You could give it to a regular Israelite. There's no obligation to give to a Levi. So when there's no Kohen present, this is quite common. If, for whatever reason you're limited with aliyahs and there isn't a Kohen in Shul, then you do not need to give the first aliyah to a Levi, meaning the Levi doesn't have to come first. The Levi needs to come second after a Kohen. Or let's put it this way, if the Levi is getting called up, he needs to be called up either after a Kohen or first. But you don't have to give the Levi the aliyah. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, but then you can give both of them acharon, right? If there's a mix-up.
Kohen or Levi would be able to receive that acharon, that added aliyah, which is added in at the end. Yes. Okay, let's look back over here. So in order to avoid embarrassment, the Yisrael, who was about to start making the bracha and was pushed aside because of the Kohen, should stand there until after the Kohen and Levi are called, and then he will be called up next. However, once the Yisrael said Hashem's name in Baruch Atah Hashem, the moment he's mentioned Hashem's name, the moment he said Baruch Atah Hashem, then at that point he gets the aliyah. The Kohen will no longer be able to go up. Same applies if a Levi is called instead of a Kohen, and the Kohen arrived before the Levi said Baruch Atah Hashem, then the Kohen goes up and the Levi waits and he is called next. The same applies if no Levi is present, or if he was unaware to anyone and the Kohen was called in place of the Levi, like what you were just asking, Mark, then the Levi arrived before the Kohen said Baruch Atah Hashem. So this principle is that even if a guy went up onto the bimah, the moment, as long as he hasn't yet started the actual bracha and said Hashem's name, Baruch Atah Hashem, he would have to stand aside and wait his turn. Now, this is particularly relevant because it could happen sometimes where there's a shortage of aliyahs. Maybe there's different people that need aliyahs for different reasons, and a Kohen might decide that he wants to step out of the shul, because as long as he's in the shul, he has to take the aliyah. He can't give it up. But he might decide he wants to step aside to give somebody else a chance. So he would have to wait outside until the other person said Baruch Atah Hashem. Because if he came in any earlier, then it was useless because he would have to go up to the bimah. See, we've already got overtime. Apologies for that. Thank you very much for joining us and wishing you a wonderful evening. I hope that you could join us tonight.